Welcome to this video on equity and trust law. This series of videos is looking at tracing and problem questions. The previous video looked at the introduction to tracing, explaining what this means and how it fits within the law of equity. In this video, we're going to be looking at the specific rules of tracing, which we can attempt to then apply to a problem question in later videos. So let's first have a look at the situation where tracing might be involved. So first there is a beneficiary who has an agreement with the trustee, so there's a trust. The beneficiary might give some of their money or property to the trustee, so this is the relationship here. Tracing might then be needed when the trustee moves or uses this money. So for example, there's three examples how the trustee might use or remove this money, potentially in breach of trust. So for example, the trustee gives the money to a third party, for example, or to buy something new, or potentially loses the money altogether, or potentially mixes the trust property with their own property. Now, tracing is required in these situations to work out where the beneficiary's assets have moved to, and so what the beneficiaries can now claim. So the first requirement in order to start the tracing process is that the party will need to have a proprietary interest in the asset they're trying to trace. So the authority for having a proprietary interest in the asset comes from the case of OJSC Oil Company, and I've put this on the slide for you. For tracing in equity, this effectively means having an equitable interest, so an equitable property interest. Although it is possible to trace through common law, and this requires ownership or some sort of common law property right, this is a lot more limited, and so the focus of this will mostly be on equitable tracing. The next question is, what counts as an equitable interest? So there are many different types of equitable interest. The main ones are an express trust, a resulting trust, a constructive trust, and a fiduciary relationship. The authority for the fiduciary relationship is Ray Hallett's estate. Now these trusts are all slightly different, but with the same idea, that there is a trustee holding someone else's property for them. If you want to know more about what an express, resulting, and constructive trust is, I'll be making a video on each of these legal structures. For a simple explanation, an express trust is what it says. It's an express agreement between parties to create a trust, whereas a resulting and constructive trust arise through implied intention to create a trust. This might actually also be through unjust enrichment of a party. There is some debate over the reasons for these trusts, but generally it's an implied intention to create a trust. So generally, for express trusts and for resulting trusts, it's quite clear when they arise. However, for the constructive trust, this can arise in many different ways, so I thought I'd give a little bit of detail to that in this video. So, first of all, there are common intention constructive trusts. An example of this is in the case of Stack and Dowden, and that's a family law case about ownership of a property. So in that specific case, it related to the division of the ownership of a house and working out the proportion of each person's interest. So where there's evidence for all the circumstances that there's an intention which shows the parties had interest in the property, this could create a trust. Another type of constructive trust can be found in imperfect gifts. An example of this is through the case of Ray Rose, and this will be covered in another equity lecture. Another example is unauthorized profits or bribes. So this can often occur through fiduciary relationships where the fiduciary is benefiting when they're not allowed to. These can be these can create constructive trusts for the beneficiary. Another example is mistaken payments or certain contracts which can create a proprietary interest. The most interesting one, and maybe the one which comes up most often in problem questions, is fraud and theft. So the authority for this situation is Westdeutscher and Islington. So this case states that a constructive trust can arise when someone steals the property. So the original owner of the property still has full ownership as well, that the thief does not gain ownership. However, it does gain a possessory title by holding the property at the time, and therefore a constructive trust can arise. That was a very short video covering the proprietary interest side of tracing. I will move on in the next video to look at some more of the specific rules of tracing, but thank you for watching this video, and for any further resources or any support, feel free to contact me on thelawguide@outlook.com. Thank you very much.